I'm gonna play you two examples and listen closely to the difference. One of these excerpts is a recording done by me in a single take. The other one, however, started like this, which I then turned into something resembling a performance by carefully and painstakingly, I might add, editing this MIDI. Can you tell which is which? This piece is Arabesque No. 2, written by Claude Debussy. As a teenager, I was obsessed with this piece, and to this day, it's still one of my favorite piano pieces out there. I am in no way, shape or form a concert-level piano player. However, I have a job where I need to make MIDI sound as realistic as possible, as if it were performed by a real human being. So in this video, I want to see how close I can get to an actual performance by just MIDI editing. And towards the end, you'll see whether people could tell the difference, yes or no. What do you think?
I'm not too sure.
Before I get started, one more thing.
Which piano sample library did you even use for that? It sounds nice.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. For this video, I'm using VSL's Studio Bluthner 1895, and this is a type of piano that Debussy actually used to own in his lifetime. Thanks so much to VSL for sponsoring this video. If you like what you hear, their pianos are still off for the month of April.
Now I already did add into the sponsorship.
This challenge started with me seeing if I could still play this piece. That wasn't my first take, and after trying a few more times, practicing a bit and getting the score ready as well, ultimately I got here. The great thing about a performance is that it has all the emotion and expression that I am able to put into it in that very moment. The way how I change tempo is natural, my dynamics are both intentional as well as a result of the natural flow of how my fingers are moving over the keys. And all of this together creates a take that I will never truly be able to recreate. However, a piano roll that looks like this is not very practical when you have to make an orchestration around this, and that's why I'm doing this. I believe MIDI will never be able to truly replace live musicians. However, budgets to hire musicians often aren't there, and we can't really play the whole orchestra ourselves. I initially recorded my full editing process, however, unfortunately there was a glitch in the audio with Cubase, so instead I'm gonna show you a step-by-step breakdown of how I turned the raw MIDI file into my recreated performance based on these four elements: tempo, dynamics, pedaling, and micro timings. Let's first have a look at tempo. If you look at my initial performance, you'll see that tempo is not fixed, to say the least. There's moments where when the line goes up, I speed up. When the dynamics increase, I also tend to increase a little bit. But there are also times when I sort of take a longer break. A way that helps me to incorporate these tempo changes is to sort of conduct myself going through this cue. At some point, you'll naturally feel yourself speeding up and slowing down. And at these moments in between phrases where you feel like you need a little bit of a break, it actually helps me to breathe in as if I were the conductor, and then when it feels right, to sort of release that breath and then continue again with the phrase. It's really based on a feeling rather than exact science. The tool I use for this is the tempo track, which ultimately looks like this. It's very cursed. You'll see here that at some points it gradually increases and decreases. There are points where I create a slight dip where I sort of recreate this idea of taking a break between two parts. And then towards the end of this, there's a very big break where I take down the tempo even further just to get this feeling of, okay, we're taking a break, breathing in, before getting into the next part. Sometimes these timing changes are intentional, but sometimes they're also just a mistake. When I was performing, at some point there was this moment where I had to think, oh wait, what is the next note again? And there's an audible pause there. And I thought it would be funny to try and see if I could recreate this pause. So I added a slight tempo dip, made everything a little bit later, and sort of tried to recreate this feeling of hesitancy in that section. And after I applied these principles to the whole section, my tempo track looked like this. The second element I used to recreate this performance was dynamics, and I like to look at this from 3 levels. Overall, through the entire piece, then for each phrase individually, and then bar by bar. So for the entire piece, I look at which phrase is louder than the other, which section needs to be quieter. It's more like broad strokes. And then per phrase, I look at how is this phrase structured in its entirety, what are the high points, where do we move towards, and then bar per bar, it's okay, where are the accents in this bar? Do we go into the next bar or do we need to take a step back? One thing that very often helps me when making dynamics and expression and CC modulation and whatnot is to actually sing the phrase for myself. When I'm singing, I'm actually doing a performance, so I'm noticing where I'm getting louder, I'm noticing if I'm drawing towards the bar or if I'm gonna take it back a little bit. I notice which notes are my highlights, and this is something that I use very, very often. As someone who films himself composing regularly, I always get struck by how often I sing something to myself. Because it just really helps to get the ideas going and to get the performance of it going as well. It sort of takes the abstraction out of it. So this piece can be roughly divided into 2 phrases, which both have a similar structure. It starts with a repeated pattern, and then a section that gets increasingly louder, before towards the end we quiet down, again also with a slowing down of the tempo. And when you look at my performance, you'll see that this roughly resembles this structure as well. Especially when we look at phrase by phrase, you see that there's a clear increase in tempo and decrease in tempo at certain spots. However, when we look at the bar by bar, it's not as straightforward as you would think. When you usually edit a crescendo in your DAW, it's very easy to just pick one point, draw a line, and then gradually increase. However, when you look at the very first bar, which is a crescendo, you'll see that not every note is necessarily louder than the last one. This is a result of me playing the intention of the crescendo, but my fingers are not programmed in such a way that the crescendo will be exactly each note is louder than the last one. So when I recreate this in the MIDI, I try to follow the intention of the phrase rather than the exact dynamics. The second phrase, for example, here I slightly adjusted each dynamic individually based on the overall structure of the shape. Next step was to make sure not every note was exactly louder than the last one, and there were some variations in it. Once I had the overall structure in place, I started adding a few more accents, starting also to look at the relationship between left hand and right hand. And when we take all that principle and apply it to the whole thing, now it looks like this. Third element that I use to make this a more realistic performance is the pedaling. Now I have to admit I am very much a pedal abuser, and sometimes when editing I like to make it very easy for myself and just at the bar line I make a 0.001 millisecond break in the pedal before I pick it up again. However, that's not really realistic. If you look at my performance, you'll see that sometimes I lift the pedal before the bar, sometimes right after. The moment when I press it is also never the same. So when recreating this performance, I try to make sure that it never fell on the beat. Always try to make some variation on where it started and where it landed. And this also added a second thing that I had to change, which was the note endings. Because when I lift a note and it's not included in the pedal when I press it, then it will be gone. And this will influence the performance as it does in my original performance. So I also made sure to include some of these imperfections where one note that I may have not wanted in the pedal because it was left from the last bar, but I still held it down with my finger, was included in the pedal for the next bar, and the other way around. One note that started the bar but was very short was not included in the pedal going forward through the bar. And the fourth element that I used is micro adjustments in timing. Now, usually when I have to make a very big orchestration and I'm on a deadline, then I like to use this feature in Cubase, which is a randomization of the quantization. So I make sure it's set to randomized at 10 ticks, press quantize, and then there's imperfections already there. Done, nice, done and dusted. But for this one, I wanted to take it a bit further, because still those micro timings, however small they are, when you're actually playing, sometimes these differences can be larger than what my randomization setting does. And I wanted to make it more detailed, because that's the whole point of this video. So there's always going to be a difference for the time when I hit a note in the left and the right hand together. And when I'm performing, I'm not really thinking about this necessarily, but there's intention behind it. For example, when we start the second phrase, I usually like to start it very slowly and then make the high note come in quite a bit late compared to when the left hand hits. It has become ingrained into my playing of this piece and is something that's just there. When I'm making the edit, I also try to be intentional about this. When I want a note to land a little bit later, when it sort of feels logical to do that in a way, I really try to emphasize how late I make it. When I'm trying to speed up, sometimes I also make sure that I pull them a little bit earlier, because then it feels like one hand is rushing compared to the other. This enhances the feeling of the tempo speeding up. After I had done all my left and right differences, I also made sure to keep some randomization in some parts. For example, the large left hand arpeggio at the end of the first phrase. that was still based on the grid, and the tempo made it varied a bit, but I thought with some extra micro adjustments, I could just enhance this feeling of performance just a little bit more. And with those changes, we ended up with the end result, which looks like this. However, I'm curious to see how well of a job I did. So I hopped into my Discord, dropped both of them without telling which was which, and asked people whether they could discern which one was the MIDI and which one was my actual performance. After 24 hours, the results were in, and about 2/3 of the people were able to tell the difference between the programmed one and the performed one. And then, as the ultimate test, I also asked my intern Joshua whether he could tell the difference. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not too sure. Okay, I'm just gonna guess that the second one is the one that is played performant, and the first one is the one that you MIDI edited. But I can't really exactly tell you why. It's just a gut feeling that I have. Tell me if I embarrass myself and I'm completely wrong.
You're actually right.
Okay. I think it's quite close. I think there is some in the runs. I would say there was some velocity differences where I felt like the MIDI edited version, there were some notes that were not like consistent on how with the velocity in like it didn't feel like a movement on how I would like play it if I was sitting in front of the piano. So there, the real one was like closer in terms of the consistency in the velocity and how the runs would go in the left hand. That is the only difference that I could tell in that.
Yeah, well, you nailed it. So, well done.
Yeah, I won.
And that's it. That's my attempt at recreating a actual performance. Now, I'm not making the point that a performance is something that you will ever truly be able to recreate. I'm not that delusional. However, I wanted to use this video to show some of the elements that you can use to create a realistic performance in your own MIDI orchestrations. Some of these may not be applicable to all of them, like when you make an orchestration, maybe a tempo map that looks like this is not such a good idea. However, I do believe that the grasp of these 4 elements can help you to recreate more realistic performances and expression in your compositions. If you would like to have a go at recreating this for yourself, do join our Discord, where we have this challenge running at the moment where people take this MIDI file and create their own interpretation of it. I hope this helps. Thanks again to VSL for sponsoring this video, and I'll see you in the next one. And that's the introduction of the green screen, everybody.